Good morning.
Good morning.
Aww.
All the build-up and now the payoff.
Yeah, that's like the whole show.
Yeah.
That should be the name of the show.
I like it. All the build-up and none of the payoff.
Yeah.
Good morning and happy hump day, everybody.
Yes, indeed. Please have a happy hump day.
Can you please say that one more time, but stare deeply?
Happy hump day.
Welcome to the morning show. I am Reed Garcia.
This is Ryder Richards.
And we're so glad to have you here today.
Yes, we are. We're so happy you're all here. The rictus smile.
For those of you who are only audio, I'm sorry, because you don't get to see our beautiful, smiling faces.
Yes, so smiley.
Yes. But for those of you who are on audio, I will now describe Ryder at length for 5 minutes so you can get a mental picture of what he looks like. Done. He actually did
I know.
He did it for me.
Summary right there for you, everybody.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what we talked about yesterday. What do you say?
Sure. What did we talk about yesterday?
Well, yesterday was Tuesday.
Oh, yeah.
October the 26th. It was around 24 hours ago. And we talked about things, you know?
Yeah. I'm blanking on what it was right now.
Well, Monday we talked about the DIY stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep, we did that.
We just jumped topics yesterday, I feel like.
I know we did. If only we had it
written down. Whatever we delivered, it must have been important.
You know what? Speaking of important, that made me think of something. Myself.
Oh, yes. Well, you are very...
Read. We talked about reading.
Yes, and writering.
Yes.
And then we had the lovely Danielle on for some taroting.
Nothing like a good Tarot Tuesday, you know?
Yeah, there we go. So that, when you brought in Tuesday, that actually made a lot of sense, and I just didn't pick up on it. My bad, Reed.
Your fault.
My bad.
Completely your fault. We will lay that at your feet.
It's okay.
So yeah, yesterday we talked a little about reading, and we talked a little bit about, we gave a little bit of our personal histories with reading and talked about how both of us went through a period in our lives where we kind of stopped reading, and then we both picked it up again.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the different formats. I'm sure one other day we'll go more in depth into the Kindle, ebook versus audiobook versus actual physical book versus paperback. I
can't wait for that episode.
It's going to be riveting.
Well, I'm actually looking at getting a Kindle. And this would be a first. I have always poo-pooed digital reading.
Well, okay, I said riveting. It sounded sarcastic, but it actually will be interesting.
I
actually want to bring in maybe some people from the book club. I think that would be a fun one to have some guests on because, it's interesting to hear, especially some people like to talk about it very definitively, like, I read a book one time on a tape and I never will do it again ever.
Right.
I'm like, you can rewind them now. It's 2021.
Well, one time with these clay tablets, you wouldn't believe how hard it was to travel with all of those.
Yeah, and you'll be able to relate so well to them.
Yes, I will.
Yes,
back when we all wore sandals and it was cool. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the different forms of reading, and then we talked about how we kind of both got back into it, a little bit about fiction versus nonfiction and how I use fiction to help me fall asleep at night, and also how fiction you can use to really get into the heads of other people, see how they're thinking and feeling. And Danielle was pointing out how it can make you become much more empathetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it kind of reminded me of a quote that I didn't really bring up, but and I can't ever remember it exactly, which is why I try not to bring it up.
Right.
But I'm going to go ahead and try anyway.
I like it.
It's something along the lines of, what is it? To cure ignorance, read. And to cure racism, travel.
Yeah, I've heard a similar type of thing, if not that. That's probably because I heard you say it one time wrong again.
Yeah. I just keep repeating myself.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is about a month's worth of content in my head, but when we go into month 2, you're just going to hear it all over again. Sorry.
We believe in recycling here at Helpful for Life.
Yeah, I know. Repetition is the, mother of all mastery or something.
And yet another quote he only partially knows. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. My football coach used to actually say that to us, and that's why I can't remember it. I think it got knocked out.
Oh, knocked out. Nice. Okay, well, I've got to play the sound effect now that you actually have an ear, and so. Oh. the applause for
See,
you.
look, everyone, I've got an earbud in. I can actually hear the applause now.
Yes, and
I mean,
actually,
I'm supposed to be hiding this from you, I'm
yeah,
sure.
and you have it turned like 90 degrees,
Oh,
by
yeah.
the way.
Well,
You do
I
have a
think
weird
it's in the
ear hole.
wrong ear.
Oh, that,
Let's-
yep,
Wow.
that
I was
helps.
trying to hide it from the camera, but now that I showed it off.
Just to be clear, if you have, all the buildup and no payoff, it's maybe in the wrong hole. So just to bring
The
that one
ear
back.
hole.
Yes, exactly. So
Well, I've never.
go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Nothing. I got nothing.
No follow up on that one. Huh?
I'm gonna keep that one to myself.
Well, today we'll be having a special guest with us today, and I'll just give a very quick teaser for it. And she's someone who has been doing data analytics for a while. And I'm not going to say too much of her backstory. I'll give her more of an intro when she joins in.
Well, how do we think about data analytics? What would you sort of discuss that as? I've heard of people who just do like database management. I've heard of all these kind of things, but what is data?
What is data analytics? That is a great question, and that's one that I think our guest would love to help us about.
That would be good.
So actually, this just in, ring-a-ling-a-ling.
Uh-oh.
Oh, but before we get to her, I just gotta start the segue and not finish it because that's the best way to do it.
That's what we do.
That's
yeah.
what we do. We want to make sure we talk about our challenge from yesterday.
Oh, yes.
So yesterday we were talking about the topic of reading, right? And so our challenge was for you to go and read something, and we're encouraging you to do something maybe in a different format than what you normally do. So if you normally just read the headlines, maybe actually read the whole article. If you normally just read a tweet, maybe go read a book, or maybe go read an essay by David Sedaris. That was one of the other ones that I brought up. There's a lot of different forms of writing: short stories, novels, novellas. But yeah. So let us know in the chat whether you're here with us live or you're here after the fact. What did you get around to reading? And if it's got a link, include a link so other people can
and
join.
I actually read something different. I read an instruction manual for a garage door opener.
Wow.
Yeah, not everyone gets to do that.
Wow.
Not
That's
everyone
quite
has
the
that
honor.
laying around.
Yeah. Is the garage open? Did you get it open?
Can't get it closed now.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. It's
Okay,
fine.
good.
Yeah.
Because you read the manual.
Yes, that's what I'm gonna say.
Well, there's this thing about men and not reading manuals, so I'm proud of you.
I was trying to, the man in manual. Yeah, I was trying to like get back in there, be a good person, take in that knowledge, and then not break something.
Well, that's all you can try.
Yeah,
And
I tried.
yeah. So back to our new guest, her name is Alexandra Mannerings, and she has a consulting company, which she's gonna correct my pronunciation in case I do it wrong, but I believe it's called Mirakinos, and she has been doing data analytics for a while. So I'm going to bring her in, so as I give more of her intro, she can correct anything I mess up. So let's go over to her, and 3, 2, and oh, there she is.
Whoa, it works. Hi.
Wow.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
Oh. Well, I'm just realizing my mic has been muted since the beginning, or at least on this view. Hopefully not this whole time. Oh, okay.
I can hear you. Can you
Okay,
guys hear
good.
me?
Yes, we can.
I think it was just on this new scene or whatever. So good to see you, Alexandra. Welcome to the show. How are you doing this morning?
Thanks. I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the writer's questions to me was, what is data analytics? And so I'm going to give my rough guess at what that is. Then I want to hear what you think.
Oh, no.
And then we'll see what Alexandra says. So the way I see data analytics is basically you collect a bunch of data over time, and this could be in your personal life, this could be in your business, or in your nonprofit, which is one of the specialties of Alexandra's. And you're collecting all of this data, and the important thing is you're looking at the trends, the things that are changing over time, and the correlations. And you're seeing, does this behavior happen all the time, or what happens when I do X? And by the way, if you're looking at personal data, hey, my weight's been trending down now for a year. That's good. So I'm analyzing all of that data. So that's kind of how I would loosely define data analytics. What are your thoughts on it?
That sounds great to me. It sounds like you look at data and you analytics.
Man,
man.
Jesus. I mean, surely there's nothing you have to add to that, right, Alexandra?
I think you guys Nailed it.
Oh,
Right?
yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, it was nice having you out.
Yeah, it was
We
great to see you
appreciate
again. And,
We're glad we brought on the experts.
Might drop out of here.
Yeah,
Right,
so
data analytics is analyzing data. Is that?
yeah,
I
so
think we
weird, huh?
Yeah, do you have anything you would like to add or change the nuance that definition?
Sure. Well, I think there's two parts of data analytics that make people a little unsure of what it means. The first is, what the hell is even data? Like,
Yeah.
what do we mean by data? And I think that's made more complicated by the fact that data really can be almost anything. And I like to talk about data being anything that you can capture and come back to, right? So if it can be stored, it's data essentially.
What about grain in my silo?
So the thing is how high is the grain in your silo? Is in some way an indication of like what's going on. So yeah, you could have like physical objects be data to some extent. I mean, archaeologists are all about using physical artifacts to figure out what happened before. They're using these remnants, these pieces that are still around, to be able to make conclusions about something that's no longer happening. But that's a very broad definition of data. And I think 90% of the time when you see people talk about data analytics, they're usually talking about digitally stored information. So things that can be captured in a digital way. And the reason for that is because now we have such incredible tools to help us with analytics, right? Before, all the analytics had to be here, but now we have these digital tools that can help us with that. And so, and then you talk about taking, all right, you have these digital pieces of information that are permanent to some extent, right? You can come back to them and see them and store them. And then you apply a technique, and there's many, many, many different techniques for taking those disparate pieces of information and trying to put them together in a way that gives you a new piece of information that you didn't have before.
Yeah, so maybe I alluded to it a little bit, but you said it much better. The fact that you're looking at this collection of data overall tells you much more about the overall picture than any one individual data point,
exactly.
Or any one piece of grain.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and trending is a really, really common thing. And I'm sorry, my cat just decided to join.
Hello. So... Hey, welcome.
And so trending is a very common one, but it's not the only one. So you might, for example, take a group of data points and try to see which data points are most like each other and not like the rest, right? So there's things called cluster analyses where you can try to say, okay, this group of data points are like each other and this group of data points are like each other, and they're not really like the other groups. So there's lots of different ways you can compare groups of these data points in order to get new pieces of information or insight.
Well, I was going to say, it's pretty much on a daily basis here that I analyze the data here and realize that Ryder is not like the others. So we're very familiar with that type of analysis.
Yeah, I've been listening to Daniel Kahneman's book Noise, and there's a lot of information about the difference between noise and bias and how they're trying to sift through information to parse those out, and talking about noise as if it's kind of almost like a background that we don't pay attention to because we're paying so much attention to bias that we're missing it. And yeah, it's been kind of interesting to see how they try to set up experiments to measure for these kind of things.
Well, and there's a whole interesting thing about bias because we've now given it 100% negative connotation, right? Like this idea of discrimination and bias, that's always and 100% bad. But the problem is there is so much noise that as humans, as computers, if we didn't have a way of discriminating against information coming in, right? A bias towards selecting certain information and not other information, we wouldn't function.
Yeah.
Right? You think about how many pieces of visual information are hitting your brain every millisecond, and your brain dumps 99% of it, because if you tried to pay attention to all of it, you couldn't see anything.
Yeah, we just couldn't function.
Yeah.
You know, if you had to like analyze every piece of information coming in, we'd just be in lockdown, just analyzing all the time.
And in order for us to be able to process and make those decisions about what we're going to think about and focus on and use, there has to be some sort of preset bias for, let's try this piece of information first, right? If you had to judge every piece of information coming and being like, is this the one I pay attention to? Is this the one I pay attention to? Like,
yeah, then the tiger comes and eats you while you're analyzing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to, exactly. I wanted to point this out because it popped in my head as we were talking about it, which, by the way, also could be the name of our show.
Yeah, this just popped into Reed's head.
Yeah, this just popped into Reed's head. And Kenny, if you give me a little help finding this link, there's a video that I watched a little while back on autism, and it actually was talking about one of, at least his interpretation of what autism is people who are on the spectrum they receive all of these inputs and they're hearing all of these things. So if you're at a conversation at a table, right, in a restaurant, well, they're hearing 17 conversations and they're seeing the flashing lights, they're seeing all these things. So they have a harder time doing that filtering. So that video was autism about oh man, I'm gonna forget the guy's name. He's the dude who does, Mark Rober is his name. So Mark Rober autism video. He talks about his son. So we'll drop that link in the chat here in a second, so y'all can watch it at home if you'd like to. But real quick, back to the data analytics, and I'm hoping that this is the first of many times that we have Alexandra on today. And, some of you at home are like, oh, why do I care about data analytics? Blah, blah, blah. That sounds so boring and lame. And I just sit at home. I don't have a job anyways. Why do I care about these things? So,
well, you should probably get a job in data analytics.
Yeah, get a job in data analytics. So, yeah, Alexandra here she's going to help us learn more about the data analytics of how you can apply that to your everyday life, because whether you like it or not, you're exposed to data every day in some ways, and there's statistics you need to know about and think about, and if you hadn't realized it before, probably now within the COVID period, if you want to call it that, there's been more statistics than ever, and interpreting what those mean is kind of tough. Oh, by the way, you can use statistics to tell whatever story you want to tell, and so that's what makes it really important for us as regular Joe Schmoes to be able to know what these people are saying and things like that.
Yeah, Alex, could you walk us through a little bit, because during COVID there were just so, like, I started hearing all these metrics. There's a percentage for this, and then there's the efficacy, and then there's this, and there's that, and like I don't know, and then like it's virulence over time, and then versus the normal flu, and like at some point I was just like, I don't know. Like I felt like I don't have enough time to dig into all the data and to really research it.
No, and what you're talking about is so true. So I have a PhD essentially in epidemiology. I studied emerging infectious diseases that spill over from animals into humans. And I was overwhelmed trying to keep up with doing all of my own research, rather than, I don't trust news very much. I'm very disillusioned with most science journalists out there. So I try to do a lot of my own stuff. So I'll go to all the primary sources. I was reading all the primary papers, like even just of, how effective are wearing masks. And I wanted to go and read all the papers and understand, like, really, what's the data for and against them. I hear, depending which side you hear, they're vehement that they're right. And I was overwhelmed trying to keep up with that. I mean, I have 2 little kids and a job and dealing with and so I can't imagine for everyone else listening to all of this, where they're having to start at ground zero and learn all these terms and what we're talking about, and then try to get into, how do I even read a scientific paper to find out if it's good evidence or bad evidence? It was just a nightmare.
It really is, especially as someone who has such the experience and background knowledge you have, and it's still hard and complicated. I've said similar things, sometimes when I'm trying to figure out or just troubleshoot technology. Like, I'm an electrical engineer. If I'm having this much problem, how much problem is the regular, like, writer having?
I know.
A lot.
True. It's so true. And I think infectious disease also brings a really interesting component where you have some really interesting complex math, right? When you're trying to calculate what's the infection rate and how fast is it spreading through the population. So you have like science, you have math, and then you have all of this like politics and personal behavior and social norms and like all this stuff that just comes together into making this really, really complicated picture. So yeah, I agree. Like, if it's overwhelming for me, I can't imagine what it's like.
For sure. And one of the things that I honestly, I don't hate many things in the world, but I hate the fact when politics, personal things, all that types of stuff gets involved with things involving people's health. I just feel like it's so wrong. And it's like, I saw this message, someone posted on Facebook, a letter a local doctor had sent out to somebody, and like this was like their broadcast about COVID, and there's so much politically charged language in it, and I'm like, this is not what science and medical stuff should be about. It should be. Go ahead,
although I'm going to put a counterpoint to that. I agree with you about 80%, but the part where I'm going to disagree though is that politics in its good form, if we're going to like disregard whatever hot mess is happening actually in politics today, in its pure form, it's trying to take what people care about and translating it into community actions or laws, right? So how do we as like a group of people agree how we're going to all behave together and like do things together? And this is what I always say, is that data analytics and science are all there to help you figure out the way you want to go once you've decided what your destination is.
Yeah, that
So
makes so
data
much
and
sense.
science and everything can't set your destination, right? You don't pull out Google Maps and go, where am I going today? You say, excuse me, Google Maps, I would like to get my child to school today on time. And Google Maps dutifully says, okay, here's 3 routes. And they've actually just updated. So now you get a route that's the fastest in time. And then you'll get a route that's the best in fuel efficiency.
That's cool.
And so this again goes to, it can't tell you which route you should take because you've at least told it where you want to go. So it's used all of its amazing data and analytics power to give you these optimal routes, but it doesn't know what to optimize for. Because is fuel efficiency more important or is getting there fast more important? And that depends on what you care about and what you are trying to achieve. And a lot of contextual information and situational information. And so in healthcare, this is where actually at some point, it can't be anything but a personal or political decision, right? Something about a value that you have. And I think about end-of-life care as a great example, right? What's the right end-of-life decision for somebody who goes into cardiac arrest and has a terminal illness, right? Should you be doing resuscitation or not? And no amount of science can answer that question for you. It depends completely on what does that person want for the end of their life? What does their family want for their end of life? So that was like, yes, I agree. There's places where politics F's up science.
Yeah.
but you can never try to fully remove the human from it, or what's the point of science?
Well, I think that's
and what's the point of politics and government without the human as well?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, it gets all messy. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
No, thank you so much.
I always say that I wish I think we make policy totally backwards though, because we have all of these politicians who are actually crafting the policy. I don't have a clue what they're doing. Instead, right, if their job is to represent our interests and our values, then what they should do is say, this is where we as a group decide we want to go. You know, I, as representing my constituents, I decide this is our final goal. And then you turn it over to people who are experts in the field and say, kind of like you do to Google, what would be the best way to get there?
So what I'm hearing, Alexandra, is Alexandra Mannerings for president 2024.
Yes, please.
Yes.
This sounds so logical and rational.
Yes. Oh,
I think you should join the Forward Party. It sounds great. Yeah.
My husband always pats me on the head. He's like, "Oh, sweetheart, you think the world makes sense?"
Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if it did, though?
Yeah.
I mean, well, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. I mean, it's not like we want to take all the mystery out of the world. Maybe that's why people are afraid of data analytics.
Well, I think that I would push on your husband a little bit, and I would say, I think the world may not make sense, but it's explainable.
Yeah.
And that's
I should say he means the human world. Like, he's like, oh, you think people are going to be rational and reasonable and like do the right thing? Like, oh, no, they don't do that.
Well, which is a very important thing to bring up, especially as we're talking about medical things and tough decisions like end of life and things like that. Yeah. Whether or not someone is rational is a good thing to know. And oh, by the way, here's your challenge, at least one of your challenges for today. If you haven't thought about it before, think about what does your end of life look like. And that could be anything from, do I want to, be buried in a casket? That could be, do I want to be resuscitated? Do I want to, I'm not going to know all the questions off the top of my head, but think about your end of life care and write it down and share it with the people that you love, because that are going to take care of you and do these things. Because guess what? Nobody wants to be there at the end when there's a surprising death and something happened. Right?
My dad's gotten into this habit. Every time I'm around him now, he's like, so whenever I get to the point where I have to be put in a hospital, I want you to just take me out and let me loose in the wild. And I'm just like, what? And he's like, I'd rather feed the wolves than like languish in a hospital bed. It's just this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that may sound a little silly, but it's important.
No,
right?
but I mean he's honest about it too. Like he's like, write this down. Like,
and because you don't, we don't want to be having to make that decision for other people, and if we don't have anything to base it off of, right? Mm-hmm. There's a quote I heard in your podcast the other day, which I'll butcher a little bit, but it was like, the best data I could act on was from 10 years ago, but we don't have that necessarily. So the point is to start now and start collecting that data, so that way 10 years from now when you need it, you already have it, right?
Yeah, well, that's the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago.
Yes.
The second best time is now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting me.
It's very true with collecting data. Is like, if you'd started 10 years ago, that would have been the best, but you didn't. But no, so they're called living wills, actually. So you can get a formally drawn up living will that basically says how you want medical care to go for you if you're not able to make decisions, and also then what you would like your funeral arrangements to be. And there's two things about that. One is that the things you have to think about is, resuscitation. How far do you want people to go to try to bring you back? Two, what happens if you're vegetative? So if you are non-responsive, they can't seem to figure out how to get you back. What do you want to have happen to you? How long do you want them to try? And then who do you want to have the decision of like whether to call it or not? Right? Name somebody and talk to that person before you name them in your will.
Yeah.
But right, like say, who do you want
Talk
to have
about
that representative power?
Yeah, I'm gonna
Right,
put
it
like
is.
I'm gonna have Ryan Reynolds on mine. He's gonna have to fly in and hang out with my wife for a few days.
Yeah.
Put him on the list.
There you go. Good plan.
Exactly. No, but that kind of stuff is really, really important. And the last thing I'd say is, if you're up for it, do some research about what those things look like. Like, read about what happens when someone tries to resuscitate you using CPR, right? Like, it's not pretty. Or like same with like cremation versus aquamation versus like all the different options. Don't just say, well, this is what, like, in my head, this is what cremation looks like. Like, you should know if you're going to make that decision and it matters to you.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting thing, especially as you look at like different cultures, different religious beliefs, and just different personal beliefs. Like, everyone looks at the body, the physical, the sack of bones, right, differently, and what happens after the fact. And that's something that, we were talking about reading yesterday. And a lot of the fiction books that I've read, a lot of times there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around somebody dying and what happens to their spirit and does it go pass on. And, a popular example is the Viking funeral where they put the body on a boat and they shoot a flaming arrow at it and it flames as it goes off into the water. But yeah, so for those of you who are just joining us, we're with Alexandra Mannerings of Mirakinos. Am I saying that correctly?
You are.
Perfect.
Well, I mean, it's a made-up word, so I guess when you're saying it right, there's not an objective right out there.
There's not an objective right out there. That is almost
another
a
good
show
title.
Name. Yeah, exactly. I like it.
Yeah, we haven't quite landed on the show title yet, so we're scouting. If you have any ideas, send them our way.
Looking.
Yeah.
But for those of you who are just joining us, I mean, Alexandra is an expert in data analytics, but clearly she's an expert in so much more, and she's been a great joy for us to talk to. And today we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg. That's not how you say that.
Yeah,
just scratching the surface. That's the phrase.
Yeah.
And it's just the tip of the iceberg. Combining them together.
Stop with the tip part.
You think that was just? You think that was just a foible? Oh no, that was an intentional segue. Yeah. It was an intentional segue.
Okay.
Why don't you tell us how you came up with your name, Alexandra? This is how you
now I feel like the audience is set up to expect something totally different.
That is exactly what we like to keep our audience on their toes, don't we?
Oh, no. So this comes from the fact that you can't get a domain name with anything that's remotely normal. I even had to make up multiple words because the first word I made up to name my company was actually taken already. And I said, who's taken a made up word already? So Meraki is a Greek word that means to do something with all your heart and soul. And nous is a Greek root that is what we use, cognos, cognate, like it's about deductive logic and thinking much more concretely about things. And so, as we sort of talked about before, I believe that you cannot separate and be successful if you have, only logic or only intuition or only heart. You have to have both together. And I like to think that if Mirakinos were a real Greek word, it would be translated as like soulful logic or like heartfelt thinking. So that's where I came up with the name for my company.
I like it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And so the combining of the two phrases, the combining of the two words, see, there's a segue I totally had planned out before.
Yeah, well done.
That. Yeah. But yeah, so for those who are out there, wondering what the heck is Mirakinos and why do you know these, or not why you know these data analytics. We'll get into that story in a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about what Mirakinos does.
Yeah. So I started Mirakinos out of, a decade or 13 years now, I guess, of analytic experience and science research to help organizations that have kind of been left behind by the data revolution. So if we look at the big players in data analytics, right, they're all huge companies with really deep pockets, and they can afford all of the big shiny fancy tools and data scientists. And the thing is like, to get to be a data scientist, you've done a lot of schooling, you've got a lot of experience, so you come with a price, right? If you're going to hire someone who's good in this, you have to pay them pretty well. And that means that you're not going to find teams of data scientists working for, the nonprofit down the street. And yet, if we look at the organizations that are actually trying to make the world a better place and are actually really committed to taking those actions that sometimes, the rest of society isn't necessarily in a place to do. And I think that nonprofits play a critical role in helping us move to the directions that we want to go. They need analytics to figure out how to do that better. Right? How can you be successful if you don't actually know how much impact you're making right now? How do you know what programs to invest in if you're not sure which ones are effective and which ones are efficient? And how do you necessarily adapt to new things that happen, whether it's COVID, whether, whatever it is, if you're not exactly sure where you are now and you're not sure what direction you're heading. And all of those things require a certain level of analytics that isn't necessarily always available to small nonprofits and small community organizations of any kind. And so that was what I am trying to do with my business is how do you make that available? And some of it's creative thinking of, all right, you can't afford a data scientist, but could you afford like a 12th of the data scientist? And if we get you guys all together, could we split a resource among us in a way that then makes it approachable and affordable for everybody? How do we leverage sharing technology platforms, right? You can't afford a server, but again, 10 of us together maybe can afford a server. Or how do we automate stuff? How do we get computers to do what computers are really good at and do the same analysis every single day so that it shows up in your inbox and you didn't have to pay a human to do it in the first place? So trying to think about how we get creative and in redesigning our approach to analytics, and then also making sure that those analytics are always in line with the values of the organization, right? That's what Miraculous stands for. So if you're talking about nonprofits, you always want the values to come first, and the analytics are just helping them get those values achieved in the world as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. And, sorry, you're gonna have to sit through me talking and saying good things about you, Alexandra. But ever since I met Alexandra, it's just one thing after another lines up so much with like what I feel like we're trying to do here at Helpful for Life, and even just the way that we're trying to do things, right? When that is combining the science and the hard, the data, the technical, the things that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. But guess what? It's happening. It's going on, whether or not you like to think about it. And we try and decipher that for people, right? And we say, here are the valuable things that you need to know. Here are the trends. Here are the outliers. Here's the stuff that doesn't really make sense because people are irrational, right? Here are all that stuff that's going on. And here is the things that you need to know to apply it to your life, to your business, to your nonprofit, to help you get to where you want to go. And oh, by the way, if you haven't thought exactly about where you want to go, that's something that we here at Helpful for Life are helping you out with your individual lives.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing a wrench into it.
Exactly.
That's my job.
And it's a good wrench, though.
Thank you.
They call it a
monkey,
a rider wrench. For a
rider
reason.
wrench.
Yeah, you got to throw a rider wrench in there every now and then. But
no, I'm totally on board with all this. It's one of the reasons I enjoy working with Reed and even started doing the podcast is because, right, emotionally or the heart, right, I'm really driven by that aspect of this. And then if I can apply my head toward it, even better. Like, how else are we going to get to the utopia? We got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and a big part of what we're trying to do with Helpful for Life here is we see the world as it is, right? And we see the messiness, we see all the things we don't like, and then we see the way it could be, right? And that's what Alexandra is trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. Is we're trying to make the world more like we think it should be, and we're trying to do it from a very compassionate way, a way where we're keeping in mind people with all of their flaws and everything, which is why I keep people like Ryder around, so I have good reminders of all those flaws, right? But yes, so we could talk with Alexandra for days and days and days. So I want to wrap up, give you out of respect for your time, but I wanted to make sure to talk about real quick before you go, your podcast. So Alexandra started a podcast. She's 8 or 9 episodes in, I believe, and it's called Heart, Soul, and Data, which is a lovely name. I love it, especially the fact that it is talking about, the softer, empathetic side, the harder, logical, rational side. Like, such a great combination. Tell us a little about your podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity for me to speak to experts across all different branches of analytics and bring it to a place where we can actually sort of have a conversation about how analytics can be approachable by anyone. And it is geared towards nonprofits. You know, we do talk about how you can use analytics in fundraising or volunteer management, but there's also just an element of how do people who are maybe less comfortable around analytics learn to be more comfortable around it. I always kind of joke that it's supposed to be an approachable conversation. You like come in and could sit down and be like, okay, maybe we could chat. Like, all right, analytics, are you actually someone I could hang out with and like have a beer with or something, or what?
Yeah.
So really trying to make it not technical, not complicated, but very approachable and actionable too. I really am trying whenever I have someone come join of like, okay, what is something that someone listening to this could do either in their nonprofit or in their daily work that would apply something that they're going to learn from this actual, you know, expert's opinion or ideas. And the interesting thing is that I get to talk to people, and I try deliberately to look all across different aspects of analytics. So we had someone come in and talk about mis and disinformation and storytelling. And it's like, well, what's that have to do with data? And you're like, it's got everything to do with data. Winnie the Pooh's all done? Oh no, we have a crisis.
Perfect timing, huh?
You want to come say hi? Come say hi.
I took off my PJs.
Oh, we took off our PJs. Okay,
cool. And my outfit.
Oh,
so this is Eva with her epic bed head and everything.
The next generation of data right there.
Yes, it is. Right? And we have this. Winnie the Pooh has ended, so now she's going to be part of the conversation.
Well, I think she was a great transition, you know. So the podcast, I'm about to say You Me Empathy, which is our guest Known Wells. If you guys haven't checked that one out from a few weeks ago, check that one out. Heart, Soul, and Data is the name of the podcast. If you had to say who you should make sure to listen to it if you're this person, who would that be?
I would say if you are early on in your analytic journey, so you're not necessarily sure about where to get started, you feel a little bit overwhelmed, that's a really great place. Or if you're trying to take your analytics like the next step. So if you find you're sort of at this place where you've got some ad hoc or random analytics, but you want to figure out how to make it a little bit more strategic, a little bit more structured, then definitely that would be a great person to have a listen and join in.
Well, awesome. So look up I keep blanking on the name. Heart, Soul, and Data, wherever you can find your podcast, and give that a listen. Thank you so much, Alexandra. We look forward to the future times we have you on. There's a lot we could talk about. You know, we talk about COVID, we talk about health and statistics, and so many other topics. We're just scratching the surface. So we're looking forward to having you on next time. And with that, have a great day and enjoy the next thing after Winnie the Pooh. Bye. All right.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's great. That was really fantastic. Yeah.
I'm very excited for all of that, and hopefully she doesn't dislike us too much,
Right,
so she'll come back every now and then.
I feel that all the time, this regret that people just aren't going to like me. Maybe what I can do is just talk at them more.
Yeah.
And then that will fix everything.
That's the answer. I've been trying that for years.
I know,
it's extremely effective.
Because everyone loves being just like jawed at.
Yeah, the trick is, you find someone who doesn't speak a lick of English, and then they're just like, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then you get in a cab with them, go on a really long trip.
Like, sir, you've been in this car for 4 hours. What are you doing?
Yeah, I don't speak English. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're going to take a quick 30-second music break here because I need a little bit more coffee. I don't know about you, but I could use a little bit of that. So we will be right back in 30 seconds.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Fresh, hot coffee.
Oh yeah.
Woo!
Cheers.
Cheers to us and to you, of course. Thank you
Yes,
for being on the
mostly you.
show. Yeah, well,
But also
mostly
me.
a little bit, both of
Yes.
us. Yeah, I think what we need to do now is the thing that we didn't do at the beginning.
Yes, let's play the midtro.
The midtro.
Helpful for life. Welcome back to the morning show. I'm Reed Garcia.
This is writer Super Delicious Richards.
Super delicious, huh?
I don't know. This just stuff just comes out. I'm not planning it.
I can taste it from here. Not just
Coffee.
delicious, but super delicious. So, for those of you just joining us, today we had a lovely special guest, Alexandra Mannerings of Mirakinos. And the Mirakinos is a company that she started to help nonprofits and other people learn a little more about data analytics and give them creative solutions. This is another thing. I meant to talk more and more about all of the things I liked about her, but I got distracted.
Yeah.
Was giving these creative solutions for people and companies to be able to achieve the things they want to achieve, recognizing the fact that nonprofits don't have a lot of money and data analytics may not be on top of mind for, oh, well, we really got to spend some money on this. It's super important. But it's like, actually, that is really important and you should spend some money on it. But Alexandra gives a really approachable way for people to get their foot in the door and to get started with that data analytics. And then another thing she does really well is she pays attention to the longevity. She recognizes, especially at like nonprofits, there's a lot of turnover, and the person doing data analytics one day may not be the one doing it a few years from now. And so having that longevity in mind from the beginning, paying attention to things like documentation and stuff like that is a great way for her to create a more sustainable solution as you're figuring out how to do the data. And, you know, kind of like we talk about data. What is data anyways?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh man. Yeah. That's some of y'all might have heard of Google Analytics, right? Which is basically that was sort of my first introduction to anything that was sort of data driven. And it was because, of course, you start building websites and then all of a sudden people want analytics on their websites. And there's easy solutions. There's ones that give you sort of simple breakdowns of how many clicks and visitors and this, that, and the other. But of course, Google Analytics allowed a whole lot of new options. So then the problem becomes, like, with all these options, it becomes more complicated to use. And then all of a sudden you have people who just specialize in something like Google Analytics, which just tracks events and clicks and time on page. And then you could look at all this. You could figure out which web pages were doing best, and then you could optimize the rest, or you could see how people were flowing through your website, and you can sort of start funneling them towards certain points where you think that they need to go to. So there becomes this kind of thing with all of this information that it is, I feel like this is fairly new. I know that this has existed in the past, but it all of a sudden became accessible and open to almost everybody to use analytics to start making decisions based off of. But of course, it takes a certain kind of mind frame. And I know that what happens, especially in things like nonprofits, is you have, once again, a lot of volunteer work. You have a lot of people coming in that are super passionate about something. And it's also kind of difficult when you're super passionate about something, but maybe don't have this kind of like hypercritical, analytical mindset
Right.
to jump into all that stuff. And sometimes all this data can be exported on like a CSV file. And you're just like, what the heck do I do with this?
Right.
This doesn't make any sense to me. It's just a bunch of numbers.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, you know, a bunch of numbers, but in reality, everything can be boiled down to a bunch of numbers, and what you do with it and is
well,
can
not
get
everything.
complicated.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, oh, how much does my soul weigh?
I see in ones and zeros, writer.
I know. It is
see.
the Matrix. Yeah.
Insert
this is-
fancy video effect here. For those of you who are on audio only, there was a really cool video effect.
Video effect was amazing.
it was-
And for those of you that are actually watching, I'm sorry y'all missed that.
It was not us just moving our fingers. Fancy. So, you know, talking about data again, I can't help but think of like the person who's on the other end, like, I really don't care about data. I don't even have anything to do with data. What is data anyways? All these types of things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about all the data that you as a end consumer are generating every day without you realizing it probably, and also how companies use that data and make money off of that data. And a common phrase that you'll hear is, if you are not paying for a service, especially if it's a digital service, then you are the product. It's always important to remember, where is the money coming from, right? And what is the purpose of this company, and what are they trying to get out of this, right? So a great example for that, which we happen to be on right now, is YouTube.
Ta-da! Yay, YouTube.
Yes.
Once again, basically a Google-based company. Or ABC, is it Alphabet?
Alphabet is the name of the way top umbrella company, which was basically a company they created a few years back, essentially to be an umbrella company. And they actually did that so they could split up different parts of Google so they could have better tracking and accountability and things like that. And I'm sure there are some reasons from the financial point of view. And so that way they could have things like Google X, where they do what's called a moonshot, which is like a really long shot where it's like, oh, we're going to try and do this really hard thing that a normal company wouldn't do because it's not financially viable. But we're going to invest in that. We're going to do that because we have all these other companies and divisions to help offset that high level of risk. And then there's other companies within the umbrella like Google, which is the search engine and also advertising and things like that, and YouTube, and I'm sure there are other ones as well. But yeah, so that's what real quick background on, in case you didn't know, YouTube is part of this big, larger thing.
And the only reason to sort of bring that up is that there's a lot of sort of metrics that we're giving away, and they're getting processed. And this whole thing, I think we basically touched on it before, but we are part of an attention economy right now, and advertising comes through being able to capitalize on that attention and turn us into consumers in certain ways. But tracking all that information is also this idea of creating sort of a digital duplicate of you. Basically, if they have a clone of all your behaviors, if they know what you're going to do under any circumstances, like, that's kind of this mythical end goal that this would all get to, is that they would know you well enough to actually be able to not only manipulate your behaviors, but to have a pretty good idea on what you're going to do at any given point. And that way they can target you better for companies you'd be willing to spend money on.
Yeah. And so with the example of YouTube, right? So right now you guys are watching the stream. Thank you very much. We're so glad that you guys are watching this. But on the back end, we can see the analytics for this. We can see how many people are watching throughout the thing. We can see a little graph. We can see what's the average attention time of somebody. Now, the one thing that is good to know is that your data is anonymized, which is one thing that's important to know about data collection. Whether or not your data is anonymized and aggregated is another word that's important to know, because it's one thing for me as a company to be trying to get information from writer about writer, and then I'm specifically tagging his name with it. So say, for example, Best Buy or Target, one of these companies, like, they may have a rewards program, which is one of probably the first and largest ways that the average consumer got involved with data. You might have thought that those things existed just to give you good deals, but no, those exist so they can build a profile on you. And just to give an example of how far that can go, I think Amazon's probably a better example because it uses a lot more wide range of things. Guess what? Amazon knows when you're pregnant. Amazon knows when you've had a baby. Amazon knows when you got a dog.
That was the big deal with Target, right? Is that they started sending a girl like what was it? Some sort of coupons
for babies,
for baby related stuff before she even knew she was pregnant, because they could track her shopping habits.
Yes.
And so they saw that her shopping habits were trending in a certain direction that only pregnant people trend. And so they started sending stuff to her house. Of course, then her dad finds out she's pregnant, and like the world explodes, because how dare you track us this accurately?
And that's been one of the things that there's been a lot of discussion on, especially over the last few years, about the ethics of data and data collection, especially because as the end consumer, guess what? Those terms of service that we all click through and say agree, which is unfortunately a very bad habit that we all quickly acquired, was, hey, we're going to do this thing because if we don't agree, we don't get to use the service, but we want to use the service. and we don't have any other options, you know? So one thing that some people say is, well, give me an option to pay so you can't collect my data.
Yes.
But guess what? It's not in the company's best interest to do that because, say, for example, with something like Google, which is a free search engine, I don't know the number. I'm sure we could find it. How much money they make off the average consumer. But let's say it's $100 a year, which honestly might be on the low end. I wouldn't be surprised. And then they say, hey, you want to do that? Are you going to pay $100 a year to do that? But guess what? You're probably not going to. But even if you were, that removes your piece of data from their data pool, which makes it less valuable.
Yeah, and then those advertisers, if you are the kind of person who has a disposable $100 to spend on something like that, you're exactly who they want to be targeting with your advertising.
Yeah, which is a very, very good point because, I mean, that's even whether or not you pay for the premium feature is data about you, right?
Yeah, no, it really is. All of this just keeps going back to the data. So we're talking about, I think right now, of course, a lot about the way that digital technologies use data to sort of track us. And there can be manipulation in there. There can be advertising. There's also, there's actually tips now on how to prevent some of this, how to secure yourself against some of it, how to block some of it. But a lot of it has to be, it seems like we're getting more and more into a time period where you have to just opt out completely from certain things. You have to just decide not to use certain things, or that you don't need certain things in order not to be tracked if that's your concern. And so, yeah, I think all this stuff is kind of complicated and messy. But, you know, earlier with our guest, we were talking about things like COVID, right? And all of the sort of data, these points that were coming out and how people were telling various stories with the data. I'm super interested in how that's done. You know, how you can actually take the same stat and spin it one way or the other. See, COVID is just another version of the flu because these numbers.
Yeah.
Or COVID is more deadly than anything else because the same number.
Well, we're going to be getting into that specifically because that is a very important thing. And, you know, just to give a very quick example of how you present the same stat can sound very different. Let's just say there's a 30% chance you're going to die from something, right? If I say, hey, you've got a 30% chance you're going to die from this, or if I say, hey, there's a 70% survival rate, that's the same exact stat, but just the language and the association completely changes kind of where your mind goes. Am I thinking more about survival, or am I thinking more about death? And that's just one really small example that doesn't get into some other things like when you're working with, right now there's a 0.000005% chance you're going to die. But if you do this one medicine, it's going to be 0.000007, which is 20% more or 40% more or whatever. Yeah. So then they say, this is 40% more likely to kill you. Yeah, but it's still one in a billion or whatever,
yes,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the difficult thing with stats. And also people keep throwing around like a number like 1% as if that's like really low. And I'm like, but when you're talking about death, that's 1 out of 100 people.
Right.
And like, you can't tell me that you don't have like 100 people that you bump into occasionally. And if you lost one of them, that wouldn't be tragic for you.
Right. And to give a sense of scale with America, that would mean over 3 million people.
Yeah, I mean, it's massive when you start looking at it that way. I just spilled coffee.
Well, you know, Ryder had a good run as a co-host on the show.
Man.
Not only is he fired,
Party foul.
He's going to have to DIY some solution to fix my very expensive $20 couch.
I'm going to have to... I'll just
blot. Don't smear.
Blot. I'll just soak it up with my shorts.
Use some of your
I'll
tears.
put my butt right on that spot.
Perfect.
Warm it up.
We'll just bring Lincoln over and have him look it up for us. So real quick, you know, there's a ton we could go into about privacy and things like that. The last thing I wanted to say about data before making a final last turn at the end was one example of data and control and privacy, because privacy comes up a lot now, especially when it comes to data, is Apple. Apple has been touting themselves as the private company, right? We encrypt your data. The other day we talked a little about...
You control your own.
Yeah, end-to-end encryption, which is done when you use their iMessage. There's things about, okay, do you control and own their data? What can they see? What can they sell? But there's some things that they do where it's like, tending towards maybe they are collecting some data. The reality is they are collecting data, right? And you can choose to see ads that are personalized to you or not. You get to make that choice.
And we need to probably also go back at some point. Maybe we could do a whole podcast just on Apple and the image that they present versus some of the things that they have done.
Yeah.
Like unlocking people's phones for different kind of governmental agencies.
Yeah.
Things like this.
There's a lot in there for sure.
Whoa, hey, you mean you just gave them the encryption key?
And then also, by the way, some of those things, it's like, well, we had to do these things because of the government, and we also were forced to not be able to tell you about it. So some of it is like, okay, there's the business factor at play, there's the end consumer, there's the government, and then there's also the government in these other countries, which may have completely different sets of laws than they do here. So yeah, just scratching the surface on that one.
Yeah, it is kind of fun though to start. Maybe it's not fun, but I think there's kind of a curious detective kind of aspect to this that we can start digging down, and there is enough going on that because data is everywhere, you can start looking up these things and finding different kind of aspects for what each one of these companies are doing, how they're treating your data. I do like the idea of being able to protect my data more, and I'm not even sure why that is. Right, and that's something else that's kind of weird to think about, and maybe we should get more into that, like why we should care, or maybe we shouldn't care.
Why? Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to point out. At the end of the day, kind of like Alexandra was saying earlier, it's up to you to decide where you want to go or how you want to do it, right? And so for some people, maybe protecting that data is more important to you than for other people, right? But just like the COVID parallel, that decision that you make, you recognize that you are also affecting the larger community. Because, for example, if all of us went and said, we're going to start protecting our data and we're going to do all of these drastic steps to do so, well, guess what? The companies would be forced to change their business model to accommodate for that, right? If everyone just stopped using YouTube, right, then they would have to change something. Now, obviously, there's a difference between reality of actually getting a large enough number of people to do something to actually send that signal to change that revenue flow. But whether or not you like to think about it, you are potentially part of the problem or a part of the solution. It just depends on how you look at it, right?
Right, yeah. Oh, man. So what was our challenge today?
Yeah, so our challenge for today was to consider your end-of-life plans, right? If you haven't done that before, especially, and you can look up a living will if you're looking to see some of the boxes that you need to check. And there are tools out there that you can use that will help walk you through the process. But at the very least, just take out a Word document and say, hey, when I die, I want to be cremated. And, if I'm in a vegetative state, don't resuscitate me if it's been more than a day or a week or whatever, and write down what some of those things are. And, I encourage you to research and learn a little bit more about the specifics if that is something that is important to you. But of course, if it's not that important to you, then don't worry too much and don't have to dive into all this research if it's not that important to you. That's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, even if it's not important to you, the biggest aspect there is that it's going to be important to somebody else around you.
Yes, and just that's a very important thing to say is just because it's not important to you does not mean that you shouldn't do it. You should do it because can you imagine having to make that decision for somebody else without knowing? It's like, oh, Mom, I didn't know what she wanted to do, and I don't know how important this is to her. Right. So I will extend that challenge and say, do that for yourself. And then tell other people about it. And if there are people in your life, especially ones who maybe are older or sick or whatnot, do that, ask them and encourage maybe you do that with them. So that's the challenge for today. But I wanted us to end on somewhat of a positive note because a lot of our stuff's been about data bad, can be used for bad things. And I definitely wanted to point out that a lot of what Alexandra does with her data is helping these nonprofits do more good, right?
Oh yeah, data has a tremendous upside to it. It's one of the effective altruism movements, for instance. Some of the best ways to actually give money, save lives, and help people has come through data.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, Ryder, is what is one way you can think of, if anything, where data has had some sort of positive impact either on you or someone or some way you've used data? Does anything pop to mind?
A lot of my sort of daily habits have come out of listening to people that are neuroscientists. People who have studied the human brain and they've crunched data and they've done fMRI scans and all this kind of, so the science and technology that is actually figured out what's going on in people's heads and what kind of states of mind you can be in to have certain things happen to you. And so I've been really interested in that. And that's sort of a more recent thing that I've been looking into. But the idea that all of this data can be crunched and compiled, and even when we get into behavioral science, that's based around studies and data. And while some of it might be flawed, then you can still kind of get these better ideas about how you as a human behave. And then if you have negative impulses in that particular instance, you can start learning how to counteract them. So that's one of the ways that I kind of am thinking about it. But also, when I brought up effective altruism, I'm really interested in these. I don't have a lot of disposable income, so when I do have some and I want to contribute to something that's charity driven, I want to know what's going to do the best, what's going to help the most. Whenever I look at things like the Susan G. Komen Foundation, there was a certain point where it was something like 80 to 90% of the money donated to them just went to administrative fees. I'm not interested in giving to that organization for that reason. Like, I think the mission is great, but I want to give to something that will actually get forward steps and momentum. So if that means we need to spend more money on data crunching for them, protein folding synthesis programs or something like that, great. If that means, I don't know, something else where we need to be funding scientists, if we need to be funding some sort of research. Like, I want to know which ones of those categories or areas my money will go toward that will make the biggest step forward for these things. So that's all data analytics, and that's all crunching of those numbers that actually lets me feel like I'm contributing in a proper or effective way.
Yeah. So define that term that writer used, effective altruism. Correct me or add to it how you see fit, but it's basically the idea that altruism, which is like wanting to do more good for those around you, and the greater good, if you will. Was that a
Yeah,
good rough definition of altruism?
Yeah, altruism is whenever you do something beneficial for other people around you without expecting anything in return.
Okay. So yeah, so effective altruism is taking that and trying to do good for others in an effective way. So one of the ways that that can be looked at is if you spend $1 with a certain nonprofit or cause or whatever, how much of that dollar is going, quote unquote, to the cause itself versus administration. Now, it's important to recognize that administration is a very real thing and it needs to happen, right? And in order to do the things that actually, quote unquote, matter, there needs to be people and structures and stuff behind it. But it's good to have a finger on the pulse of how much of that dollar is going towards that thing. And in some cases, there are actually nonprofits that actually set it up to where they have a completely separate fund where this is the administrative fund that they have other people put their money into, and then they say every dollar you put in 100% goes directly towards the cause, which I think is a really great model. And also I think it really encourages those nonprofits and whatnot to try and keep their administrative costs down, right? But we want to make sure they don't keep them down too far where they're not doing things like data analytics and stuff like that. So it's an interesting balance. But yeah, I think data is a great thing and can be used to do a lot. And I would agree with you about how data has been used in so many studies and things like that that helped us determine what we do, how we do, and what we determine are the good ways to do things. And one other thing you alluded to there was the idea of some data may not be as good as other data. And, and real quick, I'll just point out, like, I think any data you have can tell you something, but it is important to know how it was collected, where it came from, and what's maybe wrong with it. What are the biases, which could be good or bad, right? As we mentioned.
Oh, yeah. And when you start studying human behavior, what a mess.
Yeah. So there's a lot that we can get into, and we will get into a lot of that later. And we'll do some of that here on the morning show, and we'll do some of that outside of the morning show as well. So we recognize that this is not a data analytics show. So we'll give you guys just a little bit here, and then we may give you guys some more elsewhere as well. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Happy hump day to bring us back to the beginning, and go do that challenge. And you guys have a wonderful day.